I would like to introduce you to Lisa Mason, who is the entomologist and horticulture specialist in Arapahoe County. She has extensive knowledge and she just told me all the things that she will be covering today. And it is a long list of things that are not very beneficial to your trees, but she will get into that and I will be on the back end helping answer questions. So, Lisa, thank you for being here today. And again, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Allison. All right, I will share my screen. All right, well, today I'm going to talk about tree borers. And I have to say, tree borers is how I got to where I am in my career today. My background is in forestry. That was what I got my undergraduate degree at CSU in. And while I was working at the Colorado State Forest Service, it was the height of the mountain pine beetle epidemic, so like 2008, 2009. And it was this tiny, tiny little beetle that was responsible for killing millions of trees in Colorado, about 3 million trees, caused so much destruction. And the more I learned about it, and the mountain pine beetle is a native insect, and for so many reasons, the epidemic became larger than we had ever seen in Colorado. And it was fascinating to me that insects had such a huge impact on humans, on the ecosystem. And so it was really during that time that I thought, wow, I better go back and study entomology. And so that prompted me to go back to study insects at graduate school and got me to where I am today, working at Colorado State University Extension. So I'm super excited to talk more about tree borers today and the good and the bad and everything in between. And so let's start by talking about trees, particularly urban trees. Really, urban trees don't get enough credit for everything that they provide to humans and to the ecosystem. From an economic perspective, trees are an appreciating asset. They are the single, like one of the cheapest things that you can add to your property that will increase property value over the long term. Another economic perspective is they beautify areas, which impacts things like tourism, even shopping, in all of our beautiful places in Colorado. Trees provide economic support and growth. From a social and health perspective, trees absolutely impact the quality of life for humans. They enhance the neighborhood. They've been shown to reduce crime rates. And being outside, at whether it's your park or a backyard, or any green space or open space, that's so good for our mental and physical health. And trees help that. And then, of course, from an environmental perspective, trees provide wildlife habitat. They will provide shade and cooling for buildings. They filter out air pollutants. They help with stormwater runoff and erosion. And the list goes on and on. And urban trees have it pretty tough growing in these spaces where we try to grow them. So they deserve a lot more credit than they get. So some of the big things that our urban trees experience, of course, are invasive pests. I'm going to touch on one of those today, emerald ash borer. They're also facing severe weather and climate change. Imagine being a tree growing in a space where there's pavement and cement and houses and fences. All the development around our trees makes it really difficult sometimes for trees to grow successfully without stress. And then, of course, growing conditions. We live in a desert, semi-arid climate. A lot of the trees we have in our urban spaces aren't native to here. They don't naturally grow here. And so they a lot of trees do grow very well here. But it's tough for those trees. And so we're going to talk about tree borers today, but something to keep in mind is many of our tree borers are a secondary pest. And that means that they're only going to find trees that are already stressed out. And so really, if you see a pest in a tree and it's one of those secondary pests, The bigger question is, why is my tree stressed out to begin with? And so that's where we want to think about this like holistic approach to tree healthcare, because healthy trees are going to have fewer pests impact them, and they're going to be more tolerant of pests. So even if it's not a deadly tree borer, and I'm going to use Japanese beetle as an example here, like on linden trees, a healthy linden tree will be able to withstand damage from Japanese beetles. But if that linden tree is already super stressed out and declining in health, it's not going to be able to withstand feeding from Japanese beetles or other pests. So we want to think about this in that bigger picture and think about overall tree healthcare. And tree healthcare begins before you even pick out a tree to plant, before the tree is even in the ground. It comes down to you want to find the right plant for the right place. And quite often when we see urban trees struggling, it's either the wrong species, it wasn't planted correctly, or it was planted in the wrong spot. Maybe the mature size of the tree wasn't taken into account when that tree was planted. So a lot of considerations there. And then of course, soil, water, and irrigation management. We're going to talk more about that at the end when we talk a little about tree healthcare. Some of the best things we can do is provide those irrigation. Irrigation is actually the number one thing you can do for your tree, but mulch and making sure those roots aren't getting compacted or damaged, that can go a long way. And then when we look at other things, like tree borers, that's where insecticides may come into play if possible. And when we think about the use of insecticides for pest management, we got to think about the life stage of that pest and when it's most appropriate to apply. We want it to be effective. And so a lot of considerations go into that too, which we'll touch on when we talk about all these pests. And so, what is a tree or a wood borer? It's A wood borer is a broad term for insects that develop underneath the bark of the trees. Most of the time, these are beetles, but we actually have some moths that can bore into trees, and we have our horntail wasps, which bore into trees too. We'll talk more about that. And it's worth repeating, most wood borers only attack trees that are already stressed out. Usually that's from drought, or injury or diseases. So there are some exceptions here, and we'll talk about those as we go along. Typically, the life cycle of a tree or a wood borer, the borers are going to lay their eggs on the bark of the tree. When the eggs hatch, the larvae are going to tunnel and feed inside the tree. And that's oftentimes when the damage comes into play, with that larva feeding, because they feed on the tissues that transport water and nutrients throughout the tree. So in many cases, over time, different periods of time, depending on the pest, but over time that can girdle the tree. It'll cut off the transport system for those water and those nutrients. These insects go through a full metamorphosis, just like a butterfly would. So they go from an egg, a larva, to a pupa form, where then they will become an adult. The adults will exit the tree to reproduce, and then those females will lay eggs, and the cycle will repeat. For a lot of our borers, they're a 1 year life cycle. There are some exceptions that could be 2 life cycles. Now, this is where insect identification is so important. So pictured here is a variety of green and brown insects. And when we talk about, I'm going to use emerald ash borer, for example, it's a metallic green insect. We have so many metallic green insects in Colorado, and this selection of pictures, we have beneficial metallic green insects, like the green metallic sweat bee, in the bottom left. We have tiger beetles that are a fun sight to see if you're lucky to see them. Not harmful to trees or humans in any way. Then we have others that are around, but not causing any damage to the tree necessarily. The bumbled flower beetle often gets confused with other insects, but that's a decomposer. So those larvae are breaking down decaying matter. So, not a harmful beetle, but can easily be confused with other beetles that could cause harm. So this is where your extension office can really help out. If you can snap a picture or catch that insect, if you're worried that it's harming your tree or causing any harm in general, that's where your local extension office, we can help you identify it and give you recommendations if it is harming your tree or plant. Oh, and then we got Japanese beetle there, of course. And so here's another example of why identification is so important. In some cases, we have insects that will mimic other insects. And so picture here on the right, you have a European paper wasp. This does not harm trees, but it is a nuisance and invasive insect. On the left, we have the lilac ash borer, which is a very common wood-boring insect in ash trees, and lilacs too. This moth mimics wasps because wasps are stinging insects. So if it looks like a wasp, it may be predators may avoid it. So it's amazing to me how similar they look, but they are very different. And on this moth here, on the lilac ash borer, you can see it's a type of clearwing moth, and so very different than a wasp. The more reason why identification is so important. So we're going to talk about some of my favorite wood borers, the horntail wasps. Now, these wasps are completely harmless to humans. I'll say it again, completely harmless to humans. This pigeon Tremix horntail wasp could not sting you if she tried. And when we see these wasps, I know sometimes it can be alarming because they are large and they could look a little bit scary. I think they look pretty cool, but I, certainly can understand why it would be alarming if you came across one of these. But what looks like a stinger here is actually called an ovipositor. This ovipositor is specialized to drill into the bark of dead and dying trees. And she lays her eggs in those dead and dying trees. And that way her larvae can complete their development in those trees. And then the life cycle will repeat. So she's not going to lay her eggs in healthy trees. She causes no harm to trees at all. But they are wood borers, and harmless insects. We saw a lot of people noticed pigeon Tremix wasps during the pandemic because that was right around the time when the northern giant hornet, you may also know that as like the murder hornet, was found in Northeast Washington. And so it made the news headlines, and all of a sudden people started noticing these native wasps that had always been there. So no, I promise, if you see one of these, this is not the northern giant hornet. The northern giant hornet has been eradicated from Washington, so it's not even here anymore. And just know these are native horntail wasps. The whole ecosystem is connected, right? Another wood-boring insect you may come across is the giant ichneumon wasp, and that's pictured here. And she is large. She's even larger than the pigeon Tremix, and her ovipositor is like 2 to 3 inches long. And so she also has an ovipositor specialized to drill into the bark of trees, where she lays her eggs inside the pigeon Tremix wasp. And the giant ichneumon wasp larva, her larvae, feed on the pigeon Tremix wasp. So very cool. There are other species of ichneumon wasps out there. I see them a lot in the high country of the mountains, and they are not harmful to the trees or to humans. All right, let's switch gears. We're going to dive into ash tree borers. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the emerald ash borer, just because this is the most deadly and significant tree borer that we've ever seen in North America before. So for some people that live in Boulder County, I know this is old news. For us in the South Denver, the Denver area, South Denver metro area. This is very new and was recently found, and it's slowly spreading too. So it's worth spending some time on. Emerald ash borer is an invasive species, so it is not supposed to be here, and it is deadly to all ash trees in the Fraxinus genus. It was first discovered here in Boulder County, Colorado, back in 2013. And we suspect that it was brought over through infested firewood. That infested firewood, we know that because emerald ash borer had been slowly spreading throughout the eastern United States. But at that point in time, in 2013, it had not been anywhere in the Midwest. And somehow it was found all the way in Boulder County, Colorado. So we do think it was firewood. Um, in the last, 10 plus years, emerald ash borer has spread slower than expected. We had a quarantine for a while that really provided a lot of education around this pest. And maybe just due to climate conditions in Colorado, it has spread slowly, but it is continuing to spread. And so I listed some of the areas. Most recently, it was found in Carbondale on the west slope, probably through firewood. It was also found in Littleton and Centennial in 2023 and 2024. And we do think, those are possible firewood. Firewood starts too, as well. We're not positive, but we suspect. And so really, if you have ash trees in Colorado, depending on how close you are to the current infestation, if you don't have a plan for your ash tree, it's certainly time to make that plan. And then depending on how close you are to the current infestations, it may be time to treat or remove, or maybe you still have some time. So let's walk through that a little bit. How do you know if you have an ash tree? Well, ash trees have 5 to 9 leaflets. The leaves are slightly serrated on the edge. Mature trees will often have these diamond-shaped furrows in the bark. If you look at the branching structure, the branches are opposite of each other. And on female ash trees, you may have the presence of the seeds, which are a samara. We call those a samara, and that's an image of what the seeds look like on female trees. If you do have an ash tree, it's good to keep an eye on the health. Emerald ash borer is really hard to identify because emerald ash borer is going to start at the top of the tree, and these D-shaped exit holes won't be visible right away. So good to know that this is an important sign to look for, but may not be visible right away. Emerald ash borer also declines, kills the tree very, very slowly. So it's not, with mountain pine beetle and some of our other pests, it's much more dramatic, within a year. But with emerald ash borer, it is a much more slower process. So over time, you might start to see some thinning. These D-shaped exit holes are very characteristic. If you have an ash tree and you have D-shaped exit holes, you likely do have emerald ash borer. They're about 1/8 of an inch long. This time of year, we are at the end of May, so adult emerald ash borers are likely flying. I have not seen any yet or anything, but reach out if to your local extension office if you're finding adults flying, especially if it's in an area where emerald ash borer has not been discovered before. These tiny little metallic green beetles can be seen munching on the leaves this time of year, and throughout the early summer. If you start to see a bunch of woodpecker holes and woodpecker activity on your ash tree, could be emerald ash borer, it could be one of the other borers too, but certainly something to look for. And over time, you might start to notice the size of your ash leaves will slowly start to decrease. And this, again, that is part of the slower process. But if you're used to large leafy green trees or leaves on your trees, and you start to notice your tree declining in health and this smaller leaf size, it's worth asking questions on what might be going on. Here's some images to show generally what the thinning looks like. So it is very, very subtle. And if you love data and science like me, one thing you could do is take a picture, during the month of June or the month of July every year, and each year look at the tree and see if you start to notice any thinning. That can be another data point to assess the health of your tree over the long term. But these trees pictured here are EAB infested trees that are slowly in decline. So, should you save your tree if emerald ash borer is in the area or could be in the area in the future? That is really a personal decision, but it is important to know that eventually, if your tree is not treated with insecticides, it likely will die from emerald ash borer. So you have to think about how high value of a tree that you have. Is it a large mature tree? Is it providing shade to your house? Is it important sentimentally? All those factors go into consideration on if you have a high value tree. If it's not a high value tree, you will eventually have to remove it. And so thinking about when to remove it is important also. The smaller the tree is, the cheaper it's going to be. It's going to be cheaper to remove it before it's infested with emerald ash borer, because EAB can impact the integrity of the wood over time. So things like that are important to consider. Long term, you want to plant diversity. We'll talk more about tree planting here, our tree selection. We have so many great options for trees in Colorado. Um, yes, and once emerald ash borer is in the area, eventually, if it's not treated, that tree will have to be removed. So think about how large and healthy your tree is, and think about how healthy your tree is. So if you've got a full, healthy canopy, it's probably an excellent candidate for insecticide treatment. But if your tree is declining in health and it's got a lot of bare branches, it's got about more than 30% dieback, it's probably not a good candidate for treatment because all the insecticide treatments are systemic. And that means the roots have to be able to transport the insecticide throughout the tree. So a healthy tree will be able to do that. A not so healthy tree may not be able to do that as effectively. So all considerations on if you should save the tree. And of course, we'll talk about hiring contractors for treatments, but you do want to make sure they are ISA certified and a licensed pesticide applicator. Okay, tree replacement. If you've got an unhealthy ash tree, it might be worth removing and thinking about another tree option. We have a great list. It's called the Front Range Tree Recommendation List, and this sorts out all the trees based on if they're recommended for planting in Colorado, recommended on most sites or conditionally recommended. So if you want a tree that's got a pretty good shot at surviving, look at those recommended trees. And you can think about what you want in your landscape. Do you want a tree with great fall color? Do you want a fruit tree? Do you want a tree that is minimal maintenance, but might provide shade on your house? Those are all things to consider when picking out a tree to add to your landscape. And of course, call your extension office because we would love to help you with this. Emerald ash borer. If you do decide to treat your tree with insecticide, think about there's one do-it-yourself option for the homeowner versus hiring a professional. Now, homeowners have a lot more restrictions on what they can do to protect their tree. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And also, homeowners can only do soil drenches and not injections, trunk or soil injections. And we'll talk about trunk injections. That's a very effective way to treat your ash tree. Homeowners are also limited to only one application per year. And of course, products must be applied very effectively for the product to work. So with a do-it-yourself option, there's probably a little more gray area in how effectively that product is applied. Remember, if you choose to do it yourself, the label is the law. You do want to follow those instructions explicitly for your own safety, but also to maximize the effectiveness of the product. And if your tree is larger than about 10 inches in diameter or so, you will want to hire a professional because the product available for homeowners is not strong enough, where professionals have access to the stronger version of that chemical. So when we talk about treatments, we talk about the active ingredient. So every active ingredient can be found under a variety of trade names, but to understand what insecticide you're using, you'll really want to go based on the active ingredient. So when we talk about pesticides, this is just a reminder, we are an unbiased resource. So we're going to tell you the pros and cons to all the options that are available. And another great resource to look at is the National Pesticide Information Center. This is out of Oregon State University and provides a wealth of information based on active ingredients. So you have four options for emerald ash borer. We're going to walk through each one. So actually let's start there. So imidacloprid. Imidacloprid is the only insecticide option available for the homeowner. If you use this product, you'll want to apply it in the springtime shortly after bud break. This is the product where if you have a large tree, you're going to want to hire a professional because they can apply double the strength of what is available to homeowners. Now, other things to keep in mind besides following that label, imidacloprid binds to organic matter. So when you apply it as a soil drench, it is going to stick to mulch. It's going to stick to leaf debris. And if you have plants underneath your ash tree, those plants are going to uptake the product as well. So before application, you want to remove the mulch, leaf debris. If you have flowering plants underneath your tree, you cannot apply this product because it will hurt bees and other beneficial insects. And you want the tree to uptake the most amount of product as possible. So do remove those things from under your tree before application. You want to be mindful of slopes and runoff. So that way, again, you want to maximize the product available to the tree. This product does move slowly throughout the tree. And so that means to give the tree the best shot, you want to keep that tree well watered for at least 2 to 4 weeks after application. And that water is going to help the tree move the product throughout the tree. And so again, if you do have a large mature ash tree, do hire a professional instead of doing it yourself. Now, imidacloprid falls under the group of pesticides that we call neonic pesticides. There was recent Colorado legislation that passed in 2023, and that said, starting July 1st, 2024, neonic pesticides will be classified as a limited use pesticide. That means limited use pesticides are only available for purchase by certified pesticide dealers in Colorado. So this means this imidacloprid and other neonics are no longer available at the big box stores, Amazon and other locations. So you have to find those licensed pesticide dealers. A lot of local garden centers, ranch stores, those kind of businesses are licensed pesticide dealers. So you can go to the Department of Agriculture website. They actually have a spreadsheet there with all the licensed pesticide dealers. You can sort by your county and still find these products. I recommend calling them to make sure they carry products you're looking for. But that is a very new change that is impacting homeowners that were treating for emerald ash borer themselves. So let us know if you have any questions on that. Emamectin benzoate. This is one of the gold star products because there's been so much research done on this product, and it's labeled for 2 years of control, but research supports you can get at least 3 years from this. So you don't have to do that reapplication every year. If you live in an HOA, this can be a great product because you could treat half your trees 1 year, half your trees the other year, or even a third. Divide up all the trees into thirds, and then treat different trees each year to spread out the cost a little bit more. These are this is applied through trunk injections, which is great because that product is directly injected into the tree. Even though you are wounding the bark, healthy trees can repair those small wounds. So it's very effective. And another game changer with emamectin benzoate, it used to be that you had to preventatively treat your ash tree. With emamectin benzoate, you can actually treat your tree after it's been infested with emerald ash borer, as long as it hasn't lost more than about 30% of the tree canopy. So if you still have a healthy ash tree, you potentially could wait till emerald ash borer is in your neighborhood before you start treatment. So that was really a game changer with emerald ash borer treatments. Dinotefuran. This is again applied by a certified pesticide applicator. So you'd have to hire a professional. It can be applied as a trunk spray or a soil drench. This does have to be applied once a year, and the tree has to be mostly leafed out, or just right around a month after bud break. This tree moves rapidly throughout the tree, but it is a little bit more expensive for the same control. And again, you want to keep that soil moist after application. And this is another neonic product, so you don't want to apply this if there are flowering plants underneath the tree, because that will harm bees and other beneficial insects. And then our fourth option is azadirachtin. This is applied also as a trunk injection mid to late spring after the tree has leafed out. This can provide 2 years of control also. Now, in peak infestation, when the population of emerald ash borer is really heavy in an area, it is recommended that to apply this once per year for extra protection, but generally you can get 2 years out of it. And this product, this insecticide is actually extracted from the seeds of neem trees. So it is more, considered like a natural option for control. Trunk injections. Generally, the advantages, the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. So, that product is directly injected into the tree. It also, emamectin benzoate can also provide some lilac ash borer control, which we'll talk about next. And you don't have to worry about runoffs or anything. And like I mentioned before, a healthy tree will be able to cover those wounds. It might be a little bit higher of a cost, but with emamectin benzoate, you only need to do that treatment you could even wait 3 years if you wanted to. And this is just another reminder for our bees, we want to be mindful of insecticides. So especially with soil and trunk applications, make sure you don't have flowering trees underneath your ash tree. When to start treatments. This depends on where you live and also your peace of mind and your budget too. If emerald ash borer is in your local community, treatment or removal sooner than later is going to be recommended. If emerald ash borer is not in your community, it's worth looking at where emerald ash borer has currently been confirmed. I recommend visiting, call your extension office or look at the Colorado State Forest Service website because we track that information. So if your arborist is saying that it's here, you can always confirm that with the Colorado State Forest Service or your extension office. So it really comes down to your peace of mind. If you're very worried about your ash tree and you want it protected, you can start treatment anytime. If cost is an issue and you want to wait as long as possible, you can do that too, depending on how far away the infestation is. We don't give like a miles, like if it's 3 miles away, start treatment because there's so many other variables that play into the decision of when to start treatment. For me personally, emerald ash borer is in Centennial, and I'm going to wait one more year because I love that I have leaf curling aphids that attract. I have so many ladybugs in my backyard, all on my ash tree, and so I love the biodiversity that attracts. So I'm going to wait as long as possible to start treatment of my ash trees. Okay, let's just switch gears. That is by far, emerald ash borer is by far our most deadly wood borer. But let's talk about some of the other wood borers out there. Flat-headed apple tree borer. This is a borer that is often confused with emerald ash borer, but it will impact a variety of hardwoods. Oaks, maples, ash, and apple trees are all examples. They will emerge May through June. They're pretty they're a beetle that doesn't stand out. If you see them flying, it's just going to look like a brown beetle. They do have a metallic sheen to them. They're going to leave a large D-shaped exit hole. So much larger than like emerald ash borer. So sometimes there can be confusion. And this is an example of a wood borer that attacks stressed out trees. So this tree is not likely, it is not going to kill your tree, but your tree may already be in decline for other reasons. If you are concerned about it, and you know there are insecticide options available, but really I'd recommend looking at the cause of the stress of your tree. Here's an example. So if you do see them flying, the flat-headed apple tree borer, their body is a metallic green color, but most of the time if you see them with their wings covering their body, it's more of like that metallic brown sheen. And then on the right, this is a comparison to emerald ash borer. They're both metallic wood borers in the same family called Buprestidae. All right, lilac ash borer. This gets a lot of confusion with emerald ash borer, but they are not the same, and they are not deadly to your ash tree unless you recently transplanted an ash tree. But let's be honest, you shouldn't be transplanting ash trees anyway because of the risk of emerald ash borer. But you're likely to see emerald ash borer. They're very common. They are going to leave round holes along the trunk of the tree. So these holes are about the diameter of a pencil eraser. And they're fairly noticeable. So this is a clearwing moth, and this is the clearwing moth that looks a lot like the European paper wasp. So if you have lilac ash borer, again, the bigger question is, why is my tree stressed out and what can I do to reduce stress on my tree? But if you are in an area where there is emerald ash borer and you're treating your ash tree, emamectin benzoate can control both emerald ash borer and lilac ash borer. Imidacloprid is the do-it-yourself treatment for emerald ash borer that is not recommended for lilac ash borer. And so where the confusion comes in is a lot of times you'll hear people or I hear people say the ash borer, the ash borer. Well, there's a lot of different ash borers out there, and that's where identification of the insect, looking at the signs and symptoms you're seeing on the tree, can inform exactly what species you might be dealing with. Occasionally, if you do have lilac ash borer, you may see the pupal skin on the trunk of your ash tree. You know that's lilac ash borer if you see that pupal skin. Another ash borer is the ash bark beetle. Ash bark beetles are also very common in Colorado, especially in stressed out trees. These little tiny bark beetles will leave pin-sized holes along oftentimes the branches of ash trees. And so these ash bark beetles can contribute to limb dieback. But they will likely not kill your tree, or your tree is probably already going to be declining in health if the tree dies with ash bark beetles. So again, this is where irrigating, preventing drought stress is key. If you do have a pretty serious ash bark beetle problem, there are chemical controls. Again, emamectin benzoate, the trunk injection, one that gets about 3 years of treatment, could also support preventing ash bark beetles. Here's some more pictures. They are tiny, tiny insects. All right, let's switch gears. So we're going to talk about elm tree pests. Now, I threw in some non-wood borers here just because a lot questions come up a lot about these, and I do think they're worth mentioning. A nuisance pest that we have are elm leaf beetles. Elm leaf beetles are very common on the elm trees, and they're not going to bore into the tree, but they will feed on the leaf surface, and they will create a skeletonization pattern. Where this really becomes alarming to people is when they start to see large numbers and when they start to see large numbers entering a home. This happens because elm leaf beetles overwinter as adult insects and they are looking for a warm place to hang out. So, things you can do if elm leaf beetles are a problem, sealing up the entry points into your home is going to be the most effective long-term solution. There are some insecticide options available if you have large numbers of elm leaf beetles. Home, sealing up your home will be the most long-term measure. Now, I know again, this is not a bore, but it is worth mentioning because it is a significant tree pest. Now, there are bark beetles that impact elm trees also, and particularly on the west slope, they are seeing some dieback in Siberian elms. And these bark beetles are going to be more pronounced isn't the right word, but you're going to see them more during dry and drought periods. So these tiny little insects, just like other bark beetles, will emerge in April to May. And find other trees to infest. These beetles in particular can vector Dutch elm disease. So if your elm tree is struggling, it could be struggling for a wide variety of reasons, but that is good to know. If you do have elm bark beetles, preventative treatments are going to be critical to prevent elm bark beetles. Elm leaf miners. This is not a wood borer either, but this is another one that draws a lot of attention because it's a leaf miner. So this particular insect causes aesthetic damage only. It is not going to hurt your tree, but it might be alarming to see a lot of brown trees or brown leaves on the tree. If you look closely, you might even see the elm leaf miner inside the tissue of the leaves. And so they feed on that tissue. But this is an aesthetic problem only. While there are insecticides available, most of the time they are not needed. And one more pest that draws a lot of attention with elm trees, elm seed bugs. Right now, and there's a caveat to this, they are only on the west slope, but people are seeing large numbers on their elm trees. They have been confirmed in Loveland, I believe. So these are harmless to the tree. They feed on the seeds of elms, but they are a nuisance and they cause alarm because they will be present in hundreds and hundreds of numbers and they will want to enter the building or your home. So again, since this is a nuisance invader, you'll want to try to prevent them from coming into your home as best as possible. So not a wood borer, but one that just attracts a lot of attention. So for switching gears now, how are we doing on time? All right, I'm gonna keep going. We've got about 15 minutes left and a few more pests to cover. Honey locust borer. This is a borer that looks almost identical to emerald ash borer. They are in the same genus. Emerald ash borer is metallic green in color. Honey locust borer is going to be a metallic brown color even. So, since they are in the same genus, they have the same sized exit holes, D-shaped exit holes. So, occasionally I'll get a question, oh, I have D-shaped exit holes in my tree. Is my tree going to die? And if it's a honey locust tree, no, it is not, except for, so honey locust borer is a great example of a secondary pest. So, if you have honey locust borer in your honey locust tree, your tree is very stressed out already. And fixing the causes of stress are going to be critical to that tree's survival. Honey locust borer will not directly be responsible for killing the tree, even though they're in the same genus as emerald ash borer. So this is where improving the overall tree's health is going to be critical. You could do supplemental insecticide controls to to help prevent honey locust borer. But again, if you're not addressing that root cause of stress, that tree is still going to decline in health. So things to keep in mind, they're pretty easily visible on stressed out honey locust trees, and recently transplanted honey locust trees, especially if they're a little bit drought stressed. I see these borers all the time in honey locust trees. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about a couple of forest pests that are a challenge in our forests, but also in urban areas. And the first one is mountain pine beetle. Now, mountain pine beetle is a cyclical insect that is native to Colorado. And so typically epidemics will occur every 10 to 30 years or so. And they're going to occur in pockets where the trees, the ponderosa and the lodgepole pine trees, are very old, typically 80 years old or older. The young trees, they don't want the young trees because there's not enough food for them. They want the old, stressed out trees. Now, in high population levels and epidemic levels, they may go for some of the younger trees, but typically they want those older, stressed out trees. We saw, that the epidemic that we had, in 2008, 2009 was so large because we happened to have a lot of really old stressed out trees in Colorado. We've been suppressing wildfires for over 100 years, and these forests haven't had a chance to turn over. And so that epidemic was almost like the perfect storm. Since then, the population crashed, and we are seeing today, we are seeing pockets of mountain pine beetle activity where there are old, stressed out trees. Now, occasionally, and during the epidemic, we would see mountain pine beetle pop up in urban areas. During the peak, they actually documented on Doppler radar that wind was blowing these beetles to different areas, including over the divide. But also, people were transporting firewood from the mountains into our urban areas. And if mountain pine beetle was inside that firewood, mountain pine beetle could spread to that area. And so it's possible you could have mountain pine beetle in an urban area. It's good to consult and get an identification first. If you know for sure there are mountain pine beetles in your area and you live, if you don't live in a forest, well, actually, let me come back to treatments. Let me come back to that in just a second. Before I do that, I want to talk about Ips beetles. Ips beetles are another type of bark beetle that is native to Colorado, and can kill trees. So this is where identification is important. While they do have a similar life cycle and they can kill a tree within a year, mountain pine beetle absolutely kills a tree within a year. Ips beetle, depending on the tree's health, may kill a tree in 1 year. The damage is going to look very different. So with mountain pine beetle, the tree turns completely red. With Ips beetles, usually you see the top like third of the tree turn red. Now, I just said identification is important because Ips beetles start flying a lot earlier than mountain pine beetles. So if you know you have bark beetles in an area, it's important to know which one, because if you have Ips beetles, you're going to want to preventatively spray your trees a lot earlier than, say, if mountain pine beetle was in the area. So contact your extension office. We can help you sort through that. Normally, we wouldn't recommend preventative treatments for pests in general because it's good to treat for the pests that you have. This is an exception because Ips beetles and mountain pine beetles can kill a tree so quickly. You can't save the tree after the fact if it is mass attacked by these beetles. So if you are aware that there are Ips beetles in your neighborhood, for instance, this is where preventative treatments could help save your tree. We also see this in newly transplanted trees. So we've seen this a lot recently. If you are transplanting larger, say, spruce trees or pine trees, preventatively spraying them could be a benefit until those trees really get established and are healthy, because transplanted trees are more susceptible to pests. And in Arapahoe County recently, we have seen spruce trees that have been transplanted spruce trees that have been mass attacked by Ips beetles. So how do you decide what to do? Consider if Ips or mountain pine beetles are in your area, consider how many high value trees that you have, and is it worth, are some worth preventatively spraying and others are not? Are the trees newly transplanted or are they well established? All that should go into consideration. If you're a landowner with small acreage, that's a different question, because you're thinking about probably a lot more trees. So you still want to think about your high value trees, and that's where forest management can come into play, and reach out to the Colorado State Forest Service. They've got some good recommendations on that, or your extension office too. Okay, Zimmerman pine moth. I think I've got two more pests to talk about, and one of them is the Zimmerman pine moth, which we occasionally see in our urban spaces as well. So this is a moth that bores into pine trees by tunneling into the trunks, but they also tunnel into the branches. And over time, this makes the branches very susceptible to breaking. Particularly, Scotch and Austrian pine are the most susceptible. So this is another example where if you know Zimmerman pine moths are in your area and people are losing pine trees from this, preventative insecticides um, can help protect your tree. Now, the key to preventative insecticides with Zimmerman pine moth is you want to make sure that you're spraying the tree when the caterpillars are on the bark of the tree. So you want to get those caterpillars before they burrow inside the tree. That's typically in mid to April or mid-May, even a little bit earlier, because Zimmerman pine moth actually overwinters as a tiny little caterpillar, and it makes itself a little, almost like it's not a cocoon, but like a protective casing during the winter on the bark of those trees. So getting those caterpillars before they burrow in is key. Once the moths are inside the tree, treatments are not successful. So some signs you might look for is if you have massive areas of sap oozing, particularly where branches meet the trunk of the tree. This won't kill your tree right away or anything, but repeated attacks over a period of time could lead to the decline in health, especially if that tree is experiencing drought stress. And if the tree branches break, that can also, over time contribute to the decline in health of that tree. And this is a fun one. This is not a deadly or harmful borer to your trees, but you might see them in Colorado. Pine sawyers. Pine sawyers cause alarm sometimes because look at those antennae. Like it's a fairly large beetle, and if they're flying by you, it's like, whoa, what is that? But these are very fun beetles to see. They do not harm living trees. They only impact they only bore into dead or dying trees or even logs in a firewood pile. They feed on the sapwood and the heartwood. So you'll find these statewide in a variety of pine trees. What happens sometimes is if people bring firewood into their home in the winter time, the warm temperatures in the home, some of these beetles might emerge from the logs, and then that particularly can be alarming to have this giant beetle in your home. But no, it just came from the firewood. You could release it outside. Uh, these beetles are large enough that, especially if you have like freshly cut logs, if they're inside the tree, you can actually hear the larva munch on the tree, inside that log. It's pretty cool. I've only heard it a couple times, but that is a pretty cool phenomenon. Another interesting phenomenon with pine sawyers is that there is overlap when sawyer larvae are inside the tree at the same time as like mountain pine beetle, and the larva, the pine sawyers, will incidentally feed on the mountain pine beetle larva or other bark beetle larvae. So that in that way they can actually reduce numbers of those bark beetles. So we love our pine sawyer beetles. All right, well, in the last few minutes, I want to share just some tips on how you can help your trees. You want to keep them as healthy as possible to prevent a lot of these wood borers. So you want to follow best cultural care practices, and that is going to be providing supplemental water to your trees all 4 seasons, even in the winter time. I know it's a pain to drag out that hose, but your trees will thank you because in Colorado we have periods of long, dry weather and warm weather. Even in the middle of winter, we'll have days where it could be 50 degrees. So the trees need that supplemental moisture. Some methods that you can do. I've tried all three of these. You can get some 5-gallon buckets and drill tiny holes in the bottom, and then fill the buckets up, and then keep filling, move that bucket around around the base of the tree, a couple feet out from the tree, and that way you know exactly how much water you are applying to your tree. You can also use a soaker hose, which will drip water into the tree line, which is where the crown, if you can picture a tree crown and draw lines immediately to the ground, that's where you're going to want to prioritize the placement of that soaker hose. Or you can use a little sprinkler head. So after all three of those methods, I tend to use this little sprinkler head the most. And I'll set the timer and, water my trees, at least a few times during the winter if I can. Another great thing you can do for established trees are putting a mulch ring around your tree. Not only is mulch going to keep moisture in that soil longer, it's going to protect the roots, and it's going to prevent maybe compaction from foot traffic or a lawnmower or things like that. So mulch rings, a couple feet out at least, can greatly benefit your trees. You also want to keep up with pruning to prevent storm damage, and keep those tree roots healthy. So, if someone's tree is declining, I always ask for a landscape picture because oftentimes, if they're storing lawn equipment underneath the tree or patio furniture, or maybe they have a zip line tied to the tree, all those the human impacts can really impact the tree as well, and over time often in a negative way. So think about how you can, keep those tree roots as healthy as possible. If you're considering a new tree, like I mentioned before, we've got some great options for trees that grow well in Colorado. You'll want to consider the right plant for the right place. Consider the mature size of the tree and think about an irrigation plan. Irrigation is so, so important for all of our trees. And make sure you are planting that tree correctly. That's a whole other presentation in itself, but you will give your tree the best chance for survival if it is planted correctly. And if it's planted too deep, your tree might do well for a few years, maybe even a little bit longer, but it's not going to be able to survive long term because over time, that tree's essentially gonna suffocate, because the roots are not getting enough oxygen. So we are happy to help. We have so many great resources on tree care, planting trees, selecting trees. Look at the resources we have available. Once you have that new tree planted, remember that it takes years for a new tree to get established. And so we have a guideline where we measure the caliper, which is 6 inches up from the root ball of the tree. And if that tree is like 2 inches in diameter at that point, it's going to take at least 2 years for that tree to get established. That's a long time, and longer than most people would think. So during that time, supplemental water regularly is so important, and mulch will be so important. We have a great guide on caring for newly planted trees as well. And don't transport firewood. One of the best things we can do to prevent the spread of wood borers is not transporting firewood. So burn it where you buy it. Don't transport firewood because you don't know what insects are inside those logs. If you do hire a professional to help care for your trees, or treat for a pest, you'll want to make sure that they are certified through the International Society of Arboriculture and they are a certified pesticide applicator. through the Colorado Department of Agriculture. Always make sure to get multiple quotes from different companies, and make sure you're asking for a specific scope of work, customer references. Make sure they're insured. You can find a list of certified arborists at treesaregood.org. You can actually search by zip code. And of course, I know I've said this several times, but contact your local extension office. We want to help you with your trees. So you can ask us questions on tree selection, planting, and care. If you notice your tree is experiencing some symptoms of decline, take pictures and reach out. We'll try to help you figure out what's going on. We can also help with pest and disease identification. Some of our counties, particularly our northern Colorado counties, offer tree checks where master gardeners can come to your property and look at your tree. And then, of course, we have a variety of fact sheets and other resources on tree care and tree pests. And there's our website. All right, I know I'm 2 minutes over. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I appreciate your time and reach out if you have any questions. Thank you all.